With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoe's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast, the Zoom edition. Not only are we, SJ and I, going about our regular podcasting business, recording this via audio, but this is also available on video. And so there'll be a lot of reasons for that maybe we can explain, but just trying some new things, right, in 2021. So, yeah.
We're exploring more in the Exploring More podcast.
That's right. Exactly right. And there you hear, if you're joining us just audio, then you know that there's some other folks in the studio with us or in these rooms as we're working through Zoom and recording. So Sherry Jennings and Robin Thompson are hanging out with SJ and I, because what we're talking about in this Exploring More podcast series is looks like a two-parter. That's what we're shooting for, on marriage, on the Rendezvous Project. I said earlier, it's in the birthing process. It's in contractions now. It is just about to be released next month. And so we thought it would be really good for us to revisit some things, talk about the state of marriage, what makes this different, why we did it, and how you can get your hands on it, how you can get your hearts on it, and all that good stuff. So welcome to the Exploring More podcast series on the Rendezvous Project with the Jennings and the Thompsons. And I'd love to just kick it off, you guys, with what's your sense about marriage right now? 2020, COVID. I looked up some things and have some statistics, but just what's your feel? What's your thoughts about the conditions of marriage today?
I think because of the pandemic, Michael, and shutdowns and people working from home, if you have problems going on in your marriage, proximity tends to exacerbate those problems. Mm-hmm. And there's a truth to the idea that if you work 8 or 9 hours a day and you go to different offices, work in different places, whatever your profession might be, including, a stay-at-home dad or a stay-at-home mom, that's a profession in my mind. There's a truth that, when you're apart for 8 or 9, 10 hours a day, it tends to be easier to avoid the problems that really need to be talked about, the issues that we talked about. And so when you're forced to be home all day, every day, those problems tend to be unavoidable. And I would add to that, most folks, and I would include ourselves in that list of folks, at one time, we didn't know how to deal with them.
Right.
And so we tried to run away from each other. But when you're on lockdown or on quarantine, you can only run so far. Yeah, you can go out in the driveway. I'm just going to go sit in the car in the garage for a couple hours. I mean, that kind of idea to get away from each other. And just the empirical evidence from speaking to friends of mine who are in ministry. I had one guy share with me the other day that he's got 4 of his friends he's been friends with for a long time, whose marriages are imploding right now. 4 of them.
On the divorce train. Yeah. I know who we're talking about. That's right.
If we were forced to be home, if we were quarantining in the best of times and you can't, I guess, quarantine in the best of times, but it's in the midst of stress inducing uncertainty, not knowing what tomorrow's going to look like, how long this is going to last, feelings about masks and gathering limitations and all of that. That stirs something up in you. And in Scott. So, how do we each individually walk through those stresses and concerns and what it's bumping into and just all of it? And then, like you said, we're home together all the time, which sounds ideal, right? To be with the one that chose me, I chose.
When things are going well, that is ideal, right? But that's not always the case, right? So, it can be trying. We've been together, including dating and marriage and all of our story, since 1989. And I can't think of a time in that 30 plus years, that there was more of a environment that invited you to be triggered by things politically, the pandemic. I mean, there's just so much that's up in our faces all the time, and we don't always feel the same way about those things.
Mhm.
And even if we feel the same way about those things, we might respond to them differently. Sherry's response might be different than mine. So when you have two things, two objects that are close together, two rocks or two people, they tend to grind against each other, right? and create that friction. And so we're just in an environment right now, I think, Michael, that there's a greater opportunity for friction.
Mhm.
And that's not to say it's all negative. There's a greater opportunity for growth from a certain perspective that way.
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think what this year has revealed in me, there's some unhealth. I've seen my own codependency, my own lack of healthy boundaries more so this past year than I ever have before. I didn't even really know that I had tendencies towards codependency and struggle with healthy boundaries, especially with our daughters. And we've had daughters home, and how that has impacted our marriage. And so it's been revealing in our styles of relating because we're together all the time.
Mhm.
So I feel like the good is accentuated, and the things that we are challenged with, and the invitation to more, and the invitation to healing and exploration and curiosity, that has also been
Mhm.
more challenging. And how do we engage that individually and together, I think, is the invitation,
Mhm.
has been for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because I've got Wall Street Journal, I've got BBC, I've got AARP. I've got a lot of things that in direction I can go and share. But you don't have to have a giant survey of 3,000 marriages. You can look and feel and explore your own. And I would say what you guys have said is pretty true. That's what the findings also say. And so the state of marriage, it's already a volatile space. And every marriage goes through social challenges, economic challenges, styles of relating, your children and what they're going through and how that affects you. So, one of the observations that's pretty easy to make, but let me just make it for everyone, is this: that all marriages go through challenges and crisis and have their relationship in some way stressed or strained or battered by circumstances. When you take a world that has to go through that all at the same time to some degree, and like you said, SJ, COVID was clearly one major thing. I mean, here we are in late January, and this was March. So we're coming up on that year of absolute disruption that led to all the things you were saying about loss of jobs, incomes, stress, anxiety, fear, depression, all those things. It wouldn't be any surprise to anyone with the political climate, the social climate, the economic climate, and then the pandemic, all of that in a tornado, hurricane, tsunami of natural disaster type ingredients come into your marriage somehow, some way. And then what it brings up, right, has been said, it tests and it tries things. And we believe, the four of us and the Zoe team, that there's an enemy that's at work as well. So let's not bring that up, that there is an enemy that comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And there's a narrative that we get our perspective about marriage from what God created and how the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so if marriage can be one of the most powerful things, a man and a woman walking with God together, which is the underscore, right? The subtitle of the Rendezvous Project, then there you go. You know what is violently opposed and how challenging it can be to survive such ingredients thrown together, thrown at you as a couple. So the state of marriage, to take its pulse and temperature, right? You can look at your own, and it's been a time to do that, but also what's going on in the landscape. So it would not surprise anyone that counseling appointments
That's
across the globe for marriages is up 30%.
We've had people in our family, not to name names, in our own family that cannot find a counselor, cannot find a psychiatrist. Their jobs will
They're booked.
forever be secure.
Yeah.
Good for them, but yet
So what about,
shows the amount of trauma and stress.
what if you're married to one of those counselors, psychologists,
That brings its
psychiatrists?
own set of...
Yeah, we tend to think of them as the experts in help. They're in this thing too.
Mhm.
They're having to go through this too. So there's a strain and a stress on their profession. They're in it because they want to help. And to be booked solid into people's problems and challenges and their crisis and to not bring that home, it takes a toll. I mean, the work that we do, what we get to do and love to do, helping people walk with God, hearing their story, engaging, it has an effect on us. And it's an invitation to really look at that in the marriage context. So we're answering a little bit, why a marriage resource? And when we started this 18 months ago, COVID was not on the landscape. We knew that marriages are in trouble in and of themselves and are literally under attack because love is under attack. It's why we wanted to create this. And we'll get into that a little bit more in just a minute. I think one of the most challenging statistics I found was New York, DC. There was a survey done about law firms that specialize in divorce. October 19 and October 20, the comparison between
2019 and 2020?
Yeah. October, 2019 and October 2020, 70% more caseloads in 2020 October. 70% more filings.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, that doesn't explain why, but it clearly shows, yes, this has taken a toll on relationships, right? On marriage. I mean, there was statistics on intimacy or the lack thereof. There was statistics on isolation and communication. There were statistics on medications and all the things that you would just kind of think would come alongside this. But the one that I found that was really, really actually more encouraging, you referred to it, SJ, that there were interviews, and the bottom line was that there was an overwhelming large amount, percentage-wise, of couples surveyed that felt like COVID strengthened their marriage. Almost 80% in this particular survey.
Yep. There can be a tendency to, as I said at the beginning, exacerbate the issues, but there can also be okay, we're going to face this together. There's a binding together and a working together to face a common enemy, whether that enemy be job loss or illness or children at home, right? Having to do homeschool, God bless those folks that have to, walk their kids through a Zoom classroom environment. But there are challenges, but there are also opportunities to affirm the idea that you're in this together. And I think part of what we're proposing, Michael, is rather than in the physical realm, we've talked about the physical realm and the spiritual realm often on this podcast, but rather than facing challenges together and conquering them together only in the physical realm, part of what we want to propose is that couples can do that in the context of the spiritual realm as well.
Yeah, which leads me to say this, that we believe that in marriage, there's Robin's true self and her false self. And there's my true self and my false self. And they can be pretty tangled up, actually, in a person's story. So part of the Rendezvous Project was to point at that. So we've said this in the Rendezvous Project, and we say it in some of the other things we've written and shared, SJ, that I wonder how many people have divorced their spouse's false self. I have a theory that opposites attract, then they repel, and then they have that chance to become something great. But those first months that you're dating, right? Those first months that you're dating, people tend to want to contribute your best foot forward. I think, honestly, you guys, I think that's your true self. Your best foot forward would be your ability to listen, to not judge, to forgive, to be kind, to give the benefit of the doubt. That's actually, you're seeing one another's true selves. This is my theory. And then what happens is it gives way to this other creature.
Well, I think it has to do with motivation, Michael. I think in the beginning parts of a relationship, we're operating from that place, and it's through a veil darkly a little bit, a glimpse of your true self, to your point. But I think it really comes down to motivation. Some of our motivation in the beginning of a relationship is not necessarily what would be later on in a relationship. So I love that idea that we get this taste, this glimpse of, if we can look back to the early part of our relationship, before all the stuff comes along, before all the wounds, the vows, and the agreements that have happened to us as people before we met each other, that we're bringing into the relationship, but then the ones we also inflict on one another, where all that taints that idea that you're proposing, right? We can go back to that and experience a little bit of that. If we can remember what that felt like. Again, what we're proposing with this resource, there's a way, there's a journey that can be taken as individuals, as a couple, to move towards more of true self living, is the way we would describe it. The motivation is, well, I just want to win me a wife or get me a husband. What the motivation is different, right? I want to truly know, I want to truly be intimate with my spouse. And I want to be honestly, truly more intimate with myself and understand who I really am and what my motivations are.
The motivation piece, I want to take that a little bit deeper, because what can be falsely assigned as self-centeredness early in a relationship is actually what I find to be more true is I want to be loved. That's at our core. I want to be seen. I want to be wanted. I want to be known.
Yeah.
That motivation isn't wrong. It just has to be seen.
And you have to be aware of it.
For what it is. And I want to offer that to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know someone. So we need to bring the team in on some of that for sessions 3 and 4, the motivations behind the motivations, and seeing that. Share what
and I like the words desire and delight, even better than motivations.
Yeah.
You know, that we were designed to have those.
Made for intimacy.
Yeah. To long to be seen and to be known and to be delighted in, and for mutual honor and delight.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking, I hadn't thought about the idea that that was likely our truest self in those early stages. Because I can't help but think when Scott and I first met, how much he enjoyed the whole idea of, hey, let's see where this road goes. And the exploration, the desire to move in different spaces and the freedom to just explore and see what we find there, and how endearing I thought that was then, and how much I enjoyed it. And it invited my truest self into the exploration, into the freedom of spontaneity and choosing a different path. And it's okay if you're late. And then seeing through our marriage where my false self came in and shut that down, that being on time was more important, that all that exploring was a waste of time. And like you said, coming back around in later years where I love that. I love exploring with him. I love that that was so attractive then. And it's our true selves awakening again. It's the dismantling of the false self that prioritized being on time. And this is so much better. This truer self, this exploring now.
Something to ponder for sure. And you guys in the Rendezvous Project, and one of the things that has been so amazing about your story to Jennings was you did get divorced.
Our false selves did divorce each other.
And then began this relationship with God, and then reformed and refashioned a relationship with each other, which we want to talk about some more in just a minute. So before we leave this, I'm going to make up a statistic, SJs and Robin. I'm going to make it up. So just know that this is qualified by no other than me.
Well, 99% of all statistics are made up anyway. So
that makes me feel good. So listeners, here's the deal. I believe somewhere between 70 and 80% of all couples who get divorced do not go through counseling prior to.
Yeah, I don't know what the statistic is, but I mean that sounds. I think it's probably even higher than that.
Or get bad counseling. We got bad counseling.
Man, that's huge.
We got that.
90% of couples get bad counseling. So why I say that is we know a couple marriages right now that, man, if your car's broke, you take it in. If your appliance is broke, you call somebody. You spend money to do that. We know a couple couples that are not right now, we have offered counsel and they're not taking advantage. That just grieves me.
Yeah.
It's one reason among many of why we created the Rendezvous Project. What if a couple could go through this video series, these 12 sessions, and just them? You might watch it, like this, back to back and separate, and but at least it would be the kind of counsel, especially with the way virtual counseling and video and Zoom and counselors, that's the way the world has moved to meetings and conversations and assembling. What would it look like to do that, virtually? So I believe that as just a resource for counsel, we would take couples through this, and we have. That's some of the Rendezvous history that we'll talk about after the break.
Yeah. And if I can just speak to that for a second, Michael, I've watched you over the years in the context of the other main resource that we are offering right now, which is the Heart of a Warrior book and the Heart of a Warrior Encounter weekends. When men come up to you and say, hey, man, I need help, I need counseling, I got this going on, when it's more related to them as an individual, I've heard you say, come to the weekend, read the book, because in that weekend and in that book, you're going to get more counseling than I could provide in a year's worth of sessions. So the same concept would hold true for the Rendezvous Project. If we're going to sit down with you as a couple and maybe give some counsel, then I would say watch the Rendezvous Project first, or watch a session, and then we can talk about that session during our weekly meeting. So it's really set up to operate that way.
Okay, so let's take a break. We'll be right back, because that's where we want to go. We want to explore more about that, share more about that, because there's some really important reasons why we created this. And I think, SJ, you started us to turn that corner. So we'll be right back with the Exploring More podcast, looking at the Rendezvous Project in marriage in just a minute.
Hey listeners, it's SJ. Just want to give you an update on upcoming events in 2021. The purpose of Zoe events is to create a safe space where men, women, and couples can encounter God, experience Him in wonderfully intimate ways, and enter into life-changing transformation. We want to invite you to get away with God, unplug from all the noise, the busyness, and the demands of everyday routine, and invite Jesus to take you through your story, the moments or seasons in your life that He wants to heal and restore in order to shape you more fully into who you truly are. That happens over and over again throughout the Bible. Regular folks encounter an incredible God, experience His love, and they are never the same. We have 3 events coming up in 2021. March 18th through the 21st is our Heart of a Warrior Allies Advanced Weekend. April 8th through the 11th is the Women's Deepening Weekend. And then April 29th through May 2nd is the Heart of a Warrior Encounter for men. Visit zoe.org/events for more information.
Welcome back to the Rendezvous Project special Zoom edition Exploring More podcast. I think there's so many different ways we can title that. So Serena will help us. Before the break, SJ, you stepped us into that lane. Let's start with some history. We created the Rendezvous Project back in 2007. It was the first marriage weekend. Our friend Gary Barkalow and Lee, and just like a lot of things, we were building it as we were flying it, building it as we were paddling it, and it leaked. And still are, truly. Something you said before the break, SJ, because we were doing conferences with men and for men's hearts, primarily at that time, there was this constant request, hey, how do I take this home? How do I do this in my marriage? How do I get my wife to step into this with me? And I love what you said. Well, our answer across the board was, well, first you need to get your heart back. First, you need to get things out of the way that are in the way of you being your true self. We would say that to men.
If you're not sure, listeners, what that means, get your heart back. Go back and listen to the 149 episodes that preceded this one.
That's all you need to do.
But the point I would say, I heard that enough. I only came home to Robin one time and said, would you do this with me? could we do some of the things that we're doing in 2 different conferences, men and women, and could we bring those together in the wrapping of marriage, in the idea of 2 people walking with God together? And so a lot of alumni those first years, it was a lot of alumni from our events bringing their spouse, maybe who hadn't been. That was a big part of the beginnings. It was small, 10, 12, 13 couples, beach houses or mountain houses, it was a real retreat like that. But what do you remember about the history of the Rendezvous and just remembering its beginnings?
Well, as I was remembering, I took it even back a step further and was remembering when you and I were engaged. And we were coming on staff at the time of a large organization. And we would meet with people to talk about joining our team. And so we sat with a lot of married couples, I remember, over the span of 6 to 8 months. And friends and family and just a lot of married couples. And I remember it seemed like so often as they would ask us how we met and our story, and we would talk very excitedly about getting married and our future. And I just remember so often they would kind of look at each other. I remember kind of sharing this knowing look and kind of this smile that at the time it was like this smirk. And they would say something along the lines of, yeah, we remember stepping into marriage so naively and thinking that everything was going to be great and this was going to be so perfect and so good, the best thing ever. And then reality sets in and it just felt like they were mocking our hope almost, and our belief that this was going to be so good. And I just remember that even if not everybody said it in those words, I had that feeling more often than not. It just made such an impression on me and never left me. And I truly wish we had someone say to us, to speak to us, you were made for relationship. You were made for intimacy with God and with each other. You were meant to experience connection and play and safety and delight together. And you were meant to have and to cultivate delight and honor for one another. That they could even say, marriage is hard. Marriage is messy. You are broken people coming together, but there's beauty and there's the potential for beauty and goodness. And it has the potential and the invitation to bring joy and transformation as we engage each other in a way where growth can take place. I wish someone had spoken that over us,
Even as you say that now, if somebody had, Scott and Sherry, if somebody had, I know we'd have been on the edge of our seat going, would you help us?
Yeah.
Would you adopt us?
Yeah.
But
to know that was
that somebody felt that way.
And
that somebody had felt that way because they had journeyed that way.
Right.
And that's what their experience was.
We could do a whole other podcast series on, and not even just in the context of marriage, but, as Christians, we have intimacy and relationship with Jesus. We have the answer. We have the answer to the issues that we are facing ourselves and that people are facing. We have the answer. And so then why, as Christians, do we sit down with a young couple who's getting ready to get married and say, oh, just wait until you're 6 months in, and he's leaving his underwear on the floor and come back and talk to us then. I get why you might go there, but really we have the answer. We have the hope. And so there's a truth, Robin, that there's an atmosphere of that, even amongst Christian believers. And there's an atmosphere of just because we've experienced maybe some difficulty, it's almost like Christians forget the hope that's available to us in the context of our marriage, in the context of our lives. I think hope paired with reality also is helpful. Right. But really, to your point, Robin, where's the celebration? Where's the excitement? Where's the affirmation that you're made for relationship? That marriage is God's design for
union.
Yeah, thank you. Union on the planet, union on the earth. And he's designed it to be that way. So Yeah, I'm with you on that. It fires me right up.
So back to history. Let me
Yeah, we did
fire
we
to.
did a number of years in counseling, and
I think you guys have some important things to contribute when we were talking about your history with us and engagement. I mean, we all went through some other resources at times that had their place and had their time. I mean, family life and their marriage conferences, that was a huge part of helping us kind of recover some foundational things. And I think they've done a good job over the years. We'll talk about how the Rendezvous Project's a little bit different in a little bit, but our counseling, and like you said, I like that you went way back, Robin. I mean, we bring our parents' marriage into marriage. Mm-hmm. We bring the cultural iconic, we bring so much down the aisle with us. From our marriage counseling in '89 to some of the other resources that the love languages, even during our marriage, there is a glaring absence of teaching on warfare in marriage
and story and what
we're going to talk about that but
yeah, and just for the listeners' benefits, that doesn't include someone wielding a frying pan. That's not the warfare we're talking about, right? We're talking about spiritual
opposition to your heart, my heart. And now the enemy brings these things in, and they actually have more to work with. If God has more to work with in two people coming together and what they make in their coming together, well, the enemy tries to subvert that and do what they do. So the stories that we bring in and the stories that we become, that's a big part of the Rendezvous Project, what we want to focus on. And we'll talk about that some more. We have to talk about that some more in a minute. But history, could you guys just share a little bit about your history with the project and with the weekend, and even more recent history would be good too.
Yeah, sure. One of the things about the Rendezvous Project is it's a 12-session series, but we also have bonus materials in there too. We've got a whole session on sexual intimacy and some other things, but the longer version of our story, what led us to the place where we divorced and then got remarried, is explored a little bit further in a bonus material in the Rendezvous Project. But just to sum it up, Michael, we got married really young and did not get any kind of formal counseling other than, to your point a little bit earlier, what we learned from our own parents in terms of how to be married and what to expect. And those weren't necessarily intentionally taught. We observed our parents. Mm-hmm. So I think we brought a lot of that into our relationship. And so we got married September 21st, 1991, and got divorced September 21st, 2005, 14 years later. And it was really because we were both completely disoriented. The false self in both of us was ruling our lives, and that led to a path of death and destruction, really. But, God's a great redeemer, and so brought us at the foot of the cross where we were rescued by Jesus, and he showed us a path to come back together. It took about a year and a half before we got remarried again, of counseling and exploration and conversations, pursuing intimacy with God and one another. Even after we got remarried, continuing that journey. But he led us to a place of being able to share our story very transparently in the context of a church setting. Mm-hmm. And immediately following that, after we shared our story, we had a couple come up to us and say, no, we are nowhere near as messed up as the two of you were. So there must be hope for us too. And that led us to a cup of coffee with them. And then that led us to a place of a lay leader position at the church, leading the marriage ministry, seeking and acquiring counseling training, and then becoming counselors at the church for marriages. And then we found Zoe right in that area too. I think I went to my first event at Zoe and the Heart of a Warrior encounter in 2008.
Yeah.
Our first rendezvous in 2013.
Sherry, you went to a women's weekend.
I did. I went to that one.
So we've all sat in the seats, right? We've all sat in the seats of others sharing, teaching, inviting us into the larger story, the way of the heart, and the redemption of things in our stories. And so 2013 is when you stepped into one of those earlier rendezvous. Was it in the mountains? Was it in the
mountain houses? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Boone and Blowing Rock. Yeah.
And it was so beautiful, the intimacy of it. Like you'd said, the fewer couples, it was probably only 10 or 12 couples. Mm. And just watching the guide team, the couples, you two and the Andretians and the Barcalos, and the way you moved together in these conversations and what you offered was completely different than what we had been experiencing in other marriage conferences. But I think most impactful, what spoke to my heart the most, was the intentionality, the time set aside for us to sit together and for Scott to tell me his story,
Right.
for Scott to share his story, and for me to listen, not offer anything, but just listen and hear his heart, hear what he was exploring, what he experienced. And, you might think, well, what could he tell me that we hadn't already talked about? But there's so much just in what he'd been exploring through the Heart of a Warrior. It was so beautifully intimate, just sitting there listening and hearing him tell his story. And then, the other way around, I got to share my story and he got to listen. And through the weekend, that set the stage for such intimacy with God and with each other.
Yeah.
And even as you share that, Sherry, I think now that was 7+ years ago, going on 8. As we've continued the journey, God has just revealed more in our own stories that we didn't even consciously aware of back then,
Yeah. So I want to talk about in the next episode, I want to talk more about the construction of the Rendezvous Project, that huge ingredient story, and how the Rendezvous Project longs to start that conversation between two couples. Really, when you think about it, how much of your spouse's story do you know? Their girlhood, their boyhood, their teenage years. You might have met them as teenagers. You might have known them in grade school, but oh my gosh, most of us, it's later that we met, maybe in our 20s. And there's a lot of life and story back there. So in the next episode, I want to start looking at the ingredients of the Rendezvous Project and focus a little bit more on the importance of that. And I love what you said, Sherry, the time. This resource is more than just watching the video. It's what the video, each one is there to do for the conversation that a couple can have, whether it's in a small group, Lord willing, small groups in the world can come back, or people use it as a resource, or maybe they take some couples and do what we did for these years, and they go to the mountains, they go to the beach, they go somewhere to the lake, they go somewhere special, and they do this together, push play, watch, and then take the instructions and go enter into. That's what we did. We wanted to take the weekend project and give it away in a way that more couples could experience this than the number of retreats we could hold, even in a year, full time. So, SJ, before we break, can you just share a little bit about where people can go, what they can do to find out some information, and then we'll wrap up and save the rest for next session.
Yeah, the best thing to do, Michael, is go to the rendezvousproject.com. Everything's located there. We should have in place, by the time this episode airs, we should have a pre-order option available. So you can go ahead and pre-order, and then as soon as the project is ready, we'll ship it right out to you. You can find out more about the project. There's some short videos on there, some clips from the project itself with a couple interviews. We actually interviewed some couples who were attending at the time and got some of their input and some of their stories too. So all of the information is there. And I think one of the most important things that you can find there is Rendezvous Project prayer. So if you're interested in the Rendezvous Project, if you want to help us, support us in this effort to reclaim marriages and help God to bring people back together, just pray that prayer with us, listeners. That'd be great.
Yeah. So, hey, thank you guys. We'll do another episode on this because there's a lot more to talk about, but just honored to be doing this with you. I love the Rendezvous Project, what we're offering. And so until next time, continue to explore with God the more, because with God, there's always more. Thank you, friends and allies. We'll see you next time on the Exploring More podcast.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoe.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoe on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoe on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.